This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
And so it only makes sense as we look back on the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion to be able to bring in some of the critical voices of this moment. Black intellectuals, black artists, as we talk about 20 years after the LA Rebellions. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and this is Left of Black.
Don't say nothing, just listen. Got me a plan to break Tyson out of prison. Come my way and get served. Still gotta.
I just remember how repetitiously every news program and media kept showing it over and over, and it's real, you know. And I just, again, just like everyone else, just immediately said, these guys are busted. It's no way in the way, and we're no way in the world these officers are going to get away with this very inhuman, crazy act, you know, so.
I remember thinking like, because you know I saw the video of the beating, of course, and I remember thinking like, well, I mean, there's no way like the cops are going to get off. I mean, it's on video. So I remember like not even being worried about the verdict because I was like absolutely sure that I was going to be guilty.
Why did the jury see the beating of Rodney King in such a vastly different light? Here's ABC's Judy Muller.
It was never even close. On the very first day of deliberation, a straw vote made it clear that a majority of the jurors favored acquittal. The jury was made up of 10 whites, 1 Hispanic, and 1 Asian. Critics of the verdict are questioning whether this jury of their peers gave the white defendants an edge and whether King's race was a factor.
To find out that it was like really not guilty, it was really like being like kicked in the stomach, like just so utterly disrespected. Like we can watch this video of these men, you know, beating you down. And you know, this group of men beating down Rodney King, but you know, they were justified in doing so. And I mean, I just remember being, you know, very angry and upset. And you know, when I saw, you know, the riot, you know, feeling like, you know, man, I mean, what else can we do? I mean, if you can do that, and it could be on videotape, and we can't get justice. I mean, are we citizens? You know, I mean, what place do we have? And just as a young black man, like, this is the world I'm going into. So I got to get ready. I got to get ready, you know, mentally, physically, and prepared to defend myself because there's no defense for me in this society.
The jury found that they were all not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty,
not guilty. That there's a series of fires, a lot of looting is going on, a disaster area, obviously.
The jury found that they were all not guilty, not
Make
guilty.
it rough.
A lot of activity continues here in the West Coast.
Make it rough.
We have sporadic fires throughout the city of Los Angeles. Not guilty, not guilty.
Not guilty, the guilty. Devils tried to kill me. When the news get to the hood, the niggas will be.
And watching the television together, and we were all shocked. I mean, our mouths were agape. It was, we saw just nothing but chaos. And then I remember the filtered lens was that this was like a black thing, and that, you know, black people were taking TVs, and black people were getting shot at by Korean shop owners, and, you know, black people were doing this and that.
I was in my room transfixed in Toronto. It was my first year of undergraduate, and also probably my first time having 24-hour cable news focused on this one space, on Los Angeles, and I was transfixed. And to be now in the classroom with students who were not alive during that time, but talking about Rodney King and what that moment meant for surveillance from below, but also black-looking relations and community. So it's, yeah, 20 years, and to think now that we're still in those spaces of demanding recognition for the disposability of black life in the US and also globally.
I was in college in 1992. I was at the University of Virginia, so very far from anything urban or, but I remember sort of the impact that it had in terms of devaluing black bodies in a very particular kind of way that was really jarring to me in such a, you know, a modern time. And I really remember having a really difficult time processing it and beginning a whole series of different thoughts about what it meant to be black and to have, to bear witness to the violence that black men and women are often the carriers of, and then have it not matter.
And unfortunately, as a society, we have yet to have a real conversation about race in America. And so one population saw what they saw, what they thought they saw with the Rodney King beating, and one population saw what they saw, you know, in the acquittal and everything that happened after that, and you know, the infamous words, can't we all just get along?
I just want to say, you know, can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the kids?
And then of course his phrase, "Can't we all just get along?" being, you know, hugely iconic even now. And so here we are, you know, 20 odd years later, and his refrain is still extremely relevant. Can't we all just get along? Because clearly the answer is no. We're still facing a lot of the same things, and the media still structures and frames these stories in a lot of the same ways. After Rodney King, we had OJ. After OJ, we had Gina. We have Trayvon. We have all of these ways in which media looks at race through this lens of like winners and losers, without recognizing the fact that most of us are losing, because if we can't have intelligent conversations about race, we can never start solving this problem.
I remember people thinking about Rodney King in ways that weren't really, I didn't have a clear sense of the story, and the story was definitely being filtered through media that had its own objectives and its own ideas about what it was trying to say about what happened. So it was my parents who actually were able to give me that counter narrative. But what's different now is that there are other opportunities and other places where you can find that.
What are you doing, man? Welcome to the revolution, man. No. We liberating the merchandise. No, how about liberating the brain cells? What is this going to prove? It's going to prove that my mom and dad can finally have furniture in the living room. That's not right. My motto is, take a love seat, not a light. It's free! It's free! Free land! We'll take your pay! Yo, Mr. Sub, you gonna join the Dodgers? Why you come here? Why look for trouble? Yo, Black, this is Mr. Sub. He gets rich by keeping the black man tanked up on hoops. It's not true, man. I can check. I give you credit! Please, put it on us, sure. What you doing with that?
We're needy.
You need those six packs?
I work hard for what I have. Not you. It ain't right what y'all are doing.
I was 8 when the LA riots happened, but I distinctively remember my father sitting down with me and talking to me about what had transpired. And we actually watched an episode of A Different World together, which the season premiere of the final season of that show actually featured Whitley and Dwayne being in LA for their honeymoon, encountering the riots after the verdict was released. And as a site of kind of knowledge and thinking about media in that space, what it means to me is that moment of something becoming truly spectacular that we had to respond to in particular ways, and being so young, but knowing that something was wrong and something was happening, and that what I was seeing on television and the news and seeing my father and my mother's reaction to it and my community's reaction to it was something that had been brewing, which got me very interested in thinking about how do we protest, how do we get involved, what does a movement look like? These are just kind of one of the formative points of asking some of those questions then, and being able to connect that through my favorite television show at the time, right? To give me a space to talk about it, which was media.
And so in elementary school, I was already a nerd, and we had this trip to the planetarium in Philadelphia that was going to be on the exact day that the LA riots started. And I had been looking forward to going to the planetarium. It felt like my whole life, right? I was like, the sky is going to be a display. We were going to sleep over in the museum, which is a dream of mine also. So I was very excited about it. However, my predominantly white and racist school, where I was the only black student in my grade, decided to cancel the trip because the museum was in Philadelphia and they felt that any place with a predominantly black presence was unsafe for our field trip. And so I had this feeling of rage that was actually a step removed from actually what was going on, because I was very confused about what was going on. And my parents hadn't found a way to talk to me about it yet. And I was at home just like, how can I not be going to the museum right now? And it's not until looking back that I realized that it was completely consistent with everything else about my education, and understanding that white people's and institutionalized fear of black people and the presence of black people and the rights of black people and the affirmation of black people of their own rights is absolutely horrifying.
One of my very specific memories, though, of the day that the riot occurred, and we started to see these days of violence, was again a televisual one. Sitting down at home, watching what would be the finale of The Cosby Show. Theo was graduating, the family was all there. They were going to send their only son out into the future, graduating from New York University. And the thing I remember about watching that finale, watching Theo go into the world, was the incredible disconnect between the middle-class lifestyles that we saw in The Cosby Show and the violence and the rage that were occurring in the streets. The violence and the rage that Bill Cosby never chose to address at all within the context of the show. And it made clear to me the distinction between the very often fantasy world that we see in terms of mainstream culture, particularly popular culture, and the realities on the ground.
We are concerned about any question of excessive police violence, and we are equally concerned about excessive public violence. The murder and destruction in the streets of Los Angeles last night and today must be stopped. Lootings, beatings, and random violence against innocent victims must be condemned.
We want prosecution. We think it is the only credible and reasonable thing to do in order to send a message to people that there can be justice in this country.
There is a real danger that this crisis in LA will spread across the country. We hope it will not. But all of the ingredients are there. In every instance, a combination of police brutality and humiliation, compounding alienation and unemployment, sparks an explosion.
When the LA riots happened, I had also been a freelance writer for Emerge magazine, and I had recently helped to cover the case of the elevation of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, and had noted at the same time that something equally horrible and tragic was taking place down in Hamlet, North Carolina, where workers were incinerated in a chicken plant fire because 7 of the 9 exit doors of that plant were locked or blocked. But that may not seem to be related to the LA riots, but here's the way it was related in my mind, that the LA riots were a spectacular media event, and there was a lot of focus on the response to the particular incident of the beating of Rodney King. But we still haven't come to terms with the kinds of forces of disinvestment that were taking place in Los Angeles that helped to foment that rebellion, because while it was about the beating of Rodney King, it wasn't just about the beating of Rodney King. And we still haven't come to terms with the ways in which we use police power as a force for social control to deal with the problems that we don't want to grapple with in social policy. And so, I think of that moment in 1992 and what happened immediately before and what happened immediately after that as one of many watershed moments where we could have taken a different path.
And 20 years ago, I was living in New York, still live there now, in Brooklyn. There was a very deep, heavy spoken word movement going on at that time. That's a lot of what I remember going on around it, like all this poetry coming out about it and art and so on about what was happening in LA at the time. And then also what started happening in New York was like Korean grocers versus black folks, right? Came out of this LA riot thing. So it was just a very interesting time in New York, people like, why only Korean grocers in black neighborhoods? Why don't we have our own groceries? So it became, another issue. We kind of jumped off the Rodney King issue into other issues of race and so on, and where like some of Spike Lee's seminal films became very important. The film Do the Right Thing, right, you know, became a very important film.
Spike Lee and Do the Right Thing really kind of crystallized in a creative form the messages that came out of LA in terms of why can't we all just get along. And I think what I see when I look back 20 years ago to Rodney King and what I see now to Trayvon Martin and Troy Davis and the instances online where we have used social media and social technologies to really surface what was happening, we can see some parallels between how legacy media, newspapers, television, radio, etc., took the events of the LA riot and disseminated that to a public audience across the nation and across the world. What we see now is that social media is allowing the individual to tell their personal story, to be able to bring that first-person account to the public without the filter of legacy media.
When the riots first happened, I was actually in high school. I was a high school freshman, and I remember struggling to make sense of why this was happening now. I was keenly aware of racial injustice, but I was trying to really make sense of why this became the kind of tipping point, you know, for social unrest. And at the same time, I was still trying to figure out how, despite the fact that an entire world saw a beating on tape, that there was no real justice. And it took me years to really come to terms with why both things happened. But I remember looking to intellectuals for answers, public intellectuals. I remember looking to scholars, clergy. I was scrambling to find answers, as many people were, to that social dilemma. And I kind of think back to that moment now in 2012 as we think about Trayvon Martin, because we're at a moment once again where the entire world knows a certain kind of truth. And the question isn't what happened, it's what are we going to do about it. And I worry to some extent that if we don't see justice for Trayvon Martin, that we'll see the same type of civic unrest and social unrest that we saw in 1992. And just like in 1992, I worry that the focus will be on the people who have had enough rather than the structures and the systems and the forces and the institutions that produce the crisis in the first place. And that's really where the attention needs to be.
The polarization and the anger and the outrage that bubbled up on that day, I think has always been something that is, I think that's always been a constant. It's been constantly simmering under, but a lot of America is not in a position to be aware of it most of the time. And I was struck by that with the reaction to the Trayvon Martin case now that it's become a nationwide mainstream issue. I've seen many people lamenting the polarization that has been caused by coverage of the Trayvon Martin case, but I don't think there's causality in the coverage of the Trayvon Martin case. I think, first of all, looking back, growing up in New York at this countless other similar cases, Anthony Baez, Patrick Dorismond, Sean Bell, Timothy Stansbury, Eleanor Bumpers, Michael Stewart, those were all just as polarized as this was. This is not an isolated incident where social media has made the Trayvon Martin coverage uniquely polarized. That's a polarization that always rises up when there's a reaction to this sort of injustice. And I don't think it is caused by the coverage of any of those other instances either. There is a polarization that's always simmering underneath, but it's the light that's shed on incidents like this that allows the rest of the world who's privileged enough to be blind to it, to see the polarization that's always there. So it's been striking to me this month how surprised people are to see things become fraught and intense and polarized by the Trayvon Martin case 20 years after Rodney King, as if that's a new thing right now. I guess that's always been there, and there's always been lots of work to be done in between those explosions to make progress bit by bit.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.